Hey, Paul Rabalais here, and in this video we're going to talk about whether your ownership interest or membership interest in your limited liability company is protected from lawsuits that are against you personally. Okay, I'm going to get into that, take it one step at a time. So as an estate planning attorney, it's common for us with all of our clients to discuss things like, who they're going to leave assets to, how they're going to leave assets to certain people. And then also those conversations usually segue into, how to avoid tax. And then they segue into how to protect what you have while you're alive. For many people, especially the middle class, some of the protections they want are how do I protect my assets in case I go into a nursing home and I don't have to deplete my whole life savings on nursing home care. But then often, because we live in such a litigious society, many people who come in to get their legal affairs in order for when they pass away, they also are concerned about, what if I get sued? We're in this litigious society. What if somebody gets hurt on my land, I have a bad car accident, you name it. What if I get sued? How can, what of mine is protected? So there's a lot of talk out there about how the formal name is limited liability companies, but I'll refer to them as LLCs from here on out. There's a lot of talk about there on how LLCs protect from lawsuits or protect you from liability. Heck, in fact, the name LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. And I'm going to explain one way, that kind of the most talked about way that LLCs are designed to protect people from liability. But then I'm going to talk about even maybe the bigger issue, which isn't discussed much. So the common discussion around limited liability for LLCs, let me give you an example. Let's say Fred is the owner of Fred's Cupcakes LLC. So he's the owner, also called in LLC lingo, he's called the member. Maybe he has other members as well, so maybe he's a partial member. And anyway, they're cranking out some cupcakes, and as a result of some business dealings that they did, Fred's Cupcakes LLC owes one of its creditors. Let's say it's the person that supplies them with icing for the cupcakes. Fred's Cupcakes LLC owes this vendor $50,000. And for one reason or another, Fred's Cupcakes LLC, doesn't have the money to pay that vendor $50,000. Is Fred responsible for that debt? And under general LLC law, Fred personally, he doesn't have to use his personal assets to pay debts of the LLC. Unless, of course, the vendor got Fred, when they started doing business, to sign a personal guarantee, then Fred is personally responsible for the LLC's debts. But let's say that didn't happen. So Fred, even though Fred may have $50,000 in his personal bank account, he's not personally responsible for the debts of the LLC. That's most of the LLC talk and limited liability talk with LLCs. But really, I want to just kind of forget about that issue for a moment and talk about a potentially bigger issue, and I'll give you a different example. Let's say Peter, he has a very valuable interest, membership interest, ownership interest. I'm going to call it membership interest, because that's what LLCs call it. The owners of LLCs are called members. Peter has a very valuable membership interest in an LLC, and on the way to church, Peter gets in a bad car wreck, and he severely injures Susan. And so Susan files a lawsuit against Peter. She gets a judgment against Peter for $6 million, way more than Peter has liability insurance for. So now Peter is on the hook for that $6 million judgment, at least to the extent Peter's liability insurance covered it, because there are certain limitations there. Now, Peter owns a valuable interest in an LLC. So the question is, can Susan take Peter's membership interest in his LLC. Now, Susan, some of the state stuff is kind of state law dependent, but Susan can clean out, the money that Peter has in his bank accounts. Peter has a owns several publicly traded, shares of stock, and so she can take that. And with here in Louisiana, our really limited homestead exemption protections, Susan can take Peter's house. But Peter also has this valuable interest in this LLC, this business. So can Susan take that as well? So that's what we're going to focus on. And here's the deal. Any discussion about whether a personal creditor can take someone's LLC membership interest, there's always going to be discussion about a charging order. So let me address that. So I'm going to tell you a couple of statutes, and again, much of this is state specific. I'm an estate planning attorney in Louisiana. If you're in another state, you're going to have to explore and get informed about your state's particular charging order rights. And I'm not going to get too deep into this. The whole idea here is just to introduce you to the concept of LLC charging orders. But our statute, in essence, says that the judgment creditor, that's Susan, shall have only the rights of an assignee of the membership interest. I'm going to come back to that because I'm going to refer to one other statute that says an assignee of an interest in a limited liability company shall not become a member or participate in the management of the limited liability company unless the other members unanimously consent in writing. What's all that mean? So that means that when Peter, on his way to church, he gets in a bad car wreck, he's determined at fault, they get a $6 million judgment against him, Susan does. So that means that Susan is not entitled to, if she tries to seize his LLC membership interest, which is very valuable, she's not entitled to any of the rights that an ordinary member of that LLC is entitled to. Things like the right to vote the membership interest, the right to manage the LLC. She doesn't have any of those rights. She only has these rights of an assignee of the membership interest. So what is she entitled to? She's only entitled to receive distributions that Peter would have received had this charging order not been in effect. Courts have determined that if Susan would have the rights to control, vote, manage the LLC, that would be really just an unjust imposition on the other members. And so Susan, as that assignee of Peter's membership interest, she has no control over voting rights, management rights, control rights of the LLC. But she is entitled to the distributions that Peter would have been entitled to from the LLC. Now, the tricky thing there is cash distributions from an LLC to its members are discretionary by the manager or managers of the LLC pursuant to all the governing regulations and organizational documents of the LLC. So LLC managers, of which a creditor won't be one, LLC managers can elect to not make distributions. And so that makes that charging order, not very valuable at all. And so, Peter has this valuable membership interest in the LLC. He gets sued for $6 million by Susan. Susan gets these rights as an assignee, but she has no control over the LLC. The LLC elects not to make any distributions to its members, so that charging order really is worthless to Susan. So now, it may be a different issue if Peter was the sole member, or if Peter had a single member LLC, an LLC where he was the only member, only owner. That issue may be different because there are no other members whose consent would be required for the creditor to be admitted as a full member. So perhaps, depending upon state law, depending upon case law, the protections are less if it's a single member LLC versus Peter, for example, being one of multiple members of an LLC. So the concept here is if you do have a valuable interest in an LLC and you do have a personal liability, the creditor has the right to become an assignee of your membership interest with limited controls there. In fact, perhaps little value at all if no distributions are made from the LLC. So the idea here is just understand this concept of an assignee of a membership interest, understand the concept of what's commonly referred to as a charging order that a creditor may get against a judgment debtor who owns an LLC interest. So it's a complicated area, but one that I felt like at least was worth addressing in a video like this, particularly for those people who are worried that they may lose stuff if they get sued, and one or more of the things that they own is a perhaps valuable interest in an LLC, limited liability company. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to tell you that's real important is it's very critical that you turn the gray like button to blue, and you also, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss anything as I keep cranking out educational, informative estate planning YouTube videos. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you next time.